Welcome, everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you here. We have our teens, of course, and your parents, as well as some community stakeholders. So we just wanted to be able to take a few minutes to celebrate the end of the year and to talk about our successes we've had in a year that did not end as we had expected it to start. So we're going to begin with Marcy Schwab, who's our JCRC board member, with her reflections on and then reflections on the program by some of our teens and educators, followed by a slideshow honoring our participants. So stay tuned.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Marcy Schwab. I'm a member of the board of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, co-chair of JCRC's Education Committee, and a member of the Student-to-Student Advisory Board. I am delighted to join you to celebrate the successful second year of JCRC's Student-to-Student program and to thank all of our students for their service to the community. Back in September, we could never have imagined how the year would play out. We had more than doubled the number of students participating as presenters. 66 teens joined us from 33 different high schools throughout the region, representing all mainstreams of American Judaism. We had expanded the program to Northern Virginia, and we were looking forward to a full year of programming. From September through March, our students completed 39 presentations, reaching over 2,100 students and educators throughout the DMV in a range of settings: English, comparative religion and social studies classes, student leadership and religious groups, and very critically, faculty and staff trainings in Montgomery and Fairfax counties. Our students had the opportunity to present to and dialogue with the cast and crew of a production of The Diary of Anne Frank at Seneca Valley High School. They met with students studying the Holocaust in their English and social studies classes, and hardest of all, they had the challenge and responsibility of doing presentations with the entire student body of Silver Creek Middle School in Kensington when that school experienced a spate of swastika incidents in December. That day, and every time they presented, our student-to-student teens conducted themselves with remarkable maturity, candor, pride in their Jewish identities, and warmth for the students with whom they were engaging. Alas, the COVID-19 virus had other plans in store for us. When schools closed at the end of March, we were forced to cancel over 20 presentations that had been scheduled through June and beyond. However, even with this challenge, the resilience and flexibility of our staff, students, families, and community partners, led by JCRC's Director of Educational Programs and Services, Sarah Winkleman, came through. Within several weeks, we had pivoted to begin online interfaith dialogues with other religious youth groups in our region. It is no accident that JCRC launched Student-to-Student during a period when we have experienced the worst outbreak of violent anti-Semitism in our nation's history. It has been moving to hear our students speak honestly and openly about their experiences with anti-Semitism and their anxieties related to the horrible attacks in Pittsburgh and more recently in Muncie and Jersey City. Student-to-Student provides our teens with a positive, proactive way to handle those emotions and empowers them to concrete action to combat the hatred we now see. To our students, through your participation in Student-to-Student, you gave of yourselves in a very unique and sometimes challenging way. You increased your peers' understanding of Judaism, modeled mutual respect, and helped to combat anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred. You made yourselves vulnerable, sharing your very personal beliefs with your own identities, all to help repair a bit of our broken world, and for that we thank you very much. Most importantly, I want to thank the amazing Sarah Winkleman. She's JCRC's Director of Education Programs and Services. Her tireless work to make this program flourish. We are so grateful for her energy, warmth, creativity, and professionalism. Many thanks to the rest of the JCRC staff who also work on this initiative, led by JCRC Associate Director Gila Franklin-Siegel. We extend our enormous thanks to the United Jewish Endowment Fund of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington for its incredibly generous, steadfast support of the Student-to-Student initiative. Without the Endowment Fund's support, we couldn't have made this program a reality. And finally, to our parents who are joining us today, thank you for sharing your teens with us. They are amazing individuals, and we couldn't be more grateful.
So when I first walked into JCRC, I was super nervous and I felt like I wasn't really going to meet anybody and that I wasn't going to talk a lot, but I found that myself being completely wrong because I was welcomed with open arms and I was speaking a lot more than I usually do, which surprised me, and it really felt heartwarming. And this carried on into my leadership skills because I learned so much about Israel and about Judaism as a culture, and how I perceive Judaism and how other people perceive Judaism in Israel. And this was amazing presenting to my school, and it was amazing teaching about my religion to other people who may not know about Judaism as much. And even after the presentation, people said they knew a lot more about Judaism, so it really made me feel good.
Hi, my name is Janine Pack. I am what's called the Stake Young Women's President for the LDS Church. Recently, we were able to engage in an interfaith discussion with some Jewish teenagers in the area, and it was a really wonderful opportunity for the adults and especially our teens, because our teens haven't always been able to be a part of interfaith discussions, but I know that they do struggle with being out in the world and at school in places where they feel like their religion isn't understood or even misinterpreted or judged. And being able to talk to some of the Jewish teenagers about their experience and what they believe, and learning more about their convictions, and then in turn having the Jewish teenagers who are very seasoned with these kind of discussions turn around and ask our teenagers questions that they wanted to know more about our faith, was such a great opportunity for them to have open dialogue, to find connection and commonality, and really gain a newfound respect for one another. It really has been a wonderful experience and something that we hope to continue.
Hi, my name is Josh Siegel, and I'm a graduating 12th grader at the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School. 2 years ago, my mom took me to a meeting at the JCRC building for a new program called Student to Student. There were 10 of us sitting around a table, and we were talking about this new program. We were going to go to public schools and non-Jewish schools, talk about our experiences as Jewish teens, and talk about anti-Semitism. Little did I know how much this program would have an effect on me going forward. And it's truly been an incredible experience. Something that I've learned is ways that I can discuss anti-Semitism with others. And as we transition into college campuses, it's really important not only for us to teach others what anti-Semitism looks like and ways they can avoid it, but to learn ourselves how we can best talk about anti-Semitism and explain that to others.
It has been a great experience for me. I've learned so much over the past 2 years. I think the most powerful moment was when a little girl in one of the classes we were presenting to raised her hand at the end of the presentation on the Holocaust. She asked, "Why do people hate?" I looked at the other presenters and none of us knew how to answer her. It really made me think about why we go to these schools and talk to these kids. It was so eye-opening and really helped me see that this is an important program that really helps kids understand and just really shows them a new side of Jewish people, and just helps us also really see why we as Jewish people need to interact with other cultures.
My students at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School learned so much from the student-to-student program. They loved getting to hear from other kids because it helps them connect with their message in order to learn about Jewish culture and traditions. The students were especially shocked that the Jewish community is still a target of hate, which was something they wrote about in their reflections following the presentations. The students were able to learn about many different aspects of Judaism, which connected to other things that we learned and read about in short stories and books throughout the rest of our unit. They felt really confident with their newfound knowledge and often called back to their learning experience with the Jewish students. Thank you to the JCRC and the students for providing this invaluable learning experience for our 7th graders.
Hi everyone, my name's Sammy Strent. I had the privilege of being one of the group leaders for Student to Student this year, and the Student to Student program has been an incredible experience these last 2 years for me. I've loved getting to meet all of these new people in my community, and I think that the mission is really important of sharing the story of our lives as Jewish teens, and I think that in the long run it definitely will be raising tolerance and awareness towards Judaism in our community. And so I think that it's really special what we're doing, and I'm very hopeful and confident about the future of the program.
Gone tomorrow, crack the bone, get to the marrow, to be the bee and the flower, before the sweetness turns to sour. All you ever gonna give. target. Put your head over the parapet. Be uncool. Yes, be awkward. Don't look in the obvious place. The soul needs beauty for a soulmate. Get down off your holy cloud. God will not deal with the crowd. If you dream, then dream out loud. Eternally yours.
Yay. That was wonderful. I've seen that clip many, many times, and it gives me goosebumps every time. Good evening. I'm Gila Franklin Siegel. I'm the Associate Director at the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington. I am thrilled that there are so many people on tonight. We have such a great turnout, even though school has kind of officially ended. And I'm so glad that we can all be together to celebrate what was a really interesting, great ride this year, and to congratulate all of our students, and especially our seniors who are departing. And I want to give a special Yasher Koach and shout out to 4 seniors who were in our original pilot group that started over 2 years ago in 2018 when we had no clue what we were doing. Josh Siegel, Chava Schaffner, Josh Dewald, and I'm forgetting one person. And Sarah, who is it?
Hannah Handelman.
And Hannah Handelman. Thank you. And we wish them the best of luck. They really were so involved in shaping this program. And we went from 8 kids to over 60. And we went from just a small corner of Montgomery County to working throughout Northern Virginia and Montgomery County. I want to also thank Marcy Schwab, who you saw, and June Trone, who are members of the JCRC board and really shepherd our education work. Most of all, I want to thank our phenomenal staff at JCRC. Sarah Winkleman is a force of nature. And those of you who received packages on your doorstep through contactless delivery and mugs know that. She sets the bar incredibly high and is such a fabulous motivator in terms of getting our teens to dive into something that is important, that I hope will have a lasting impact on them. And I also want to thank Rabbi Abby Sharovsky on the JCRC staff for working with Sarah on all of the interfaith components and the training components, and Alexis Schwartz for providing the technical and graphic support for this, and our intern Isabella Jaffrey. Probably the most important thanks I have is for the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington's United Jewish Endowment Fund. This program would not exist without the endowment fund, and we just found out that our grant for next year is being renewed at level funding. In a year like this, which has been so full of hardship, we are so grateful to the endowment fund for continuing its support, for really making this kind of work, this outreach work, a priority, and understanding the profound impact it has on the community. For next year, this coming year, we will be able to continue because we have that funding. We all hope that schools open again in our brick and mortar schools, that is, and we hope that we'll be able to go back to doing student to student the way it was originally intended. But as with everything in the education realm, we're operating on dual tracks right now. We have already begun moving the program online. We did some phenomenal interfaith work after Passover through to the end of the school year. And we fully intend to continue expanding that and working with our local school systems and houses of worship to even expand that further. Having said that, Governor Northam says that schools in Virginia are going to be opening up. So we're ready to go either way. So we thank the Endowment Fund. I just want to put in a plug. Even with the endowment funding, JCRC subsidizes this program a tremendous amount, and we don't charge for it in contrast to a lot of other leadership programs. JCRC does its fundraising once a year in connection with our annual gala, which is usually in June. Alas, it was not in June this year. It will be online in September. We're planning a very fun evening. And I ask you and encourage you to keep JCRC in mind in terms of your tzedakah and in terms of your giving, because the agency really has invested in this program so much, and I think the payoff both to our teens and to the community is enormous, especially at such a time of rising hatred and anti-Semitism. So keep an eye out in your email boxes for that information. Now I want to move to the fun and interesting part of our evening. It's all fun, but this is especially fun and especially timely. We're so pleased tonight to have with us Noah Shafutinsky, also known as Westside Gravy, a rapper, a GW student, and a musician who is a Jew, and whose music really reflects his Jewish identity and his Zionist identity, as well as his identity as a Jew of color and his Black pride. We look forward to hearing his insights. It's particularly poignant and phenomenal to be dialoguing with him tonight as the country's gone through a couple of really challenging weeks, and when the thoughts and insights of the Jews of color, people of color within our Jewish family can and should be front and center. So we look forward to listening, to hearing and learning, and to enjoying the music. Noah is going to be interviewed by one of our amazing seniors, Aiden Horn, who is one of our student-to-student group leaders who just graduated from Berman Hebrew Academy. And with that, I am going to turn the platform over to Aiden and Noah. And thank you all again for being here, for your support, for sharing your amazing kids with us.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be interviewing Noah, Westside Gravy, tonight. Thank you guys for coming out. Noah, can we start by you talking about yourself, how you got into music, where you grew up, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored, and hearing about the work that you all have done just really brings a lot of pride and hope to myself. So I'd just like to start out by saying congratulations and be'atzlacha, good luck with your future endeavors to everyone who's graduating. So a little bit about myself. As mentioned, my name is Noah Shafutinsky, and I was actually raised mostly in San Diego, California, but I moved around a lot growing up because my dad was in the Navy. So growing up, I'd say music was one of the most important aspects of my upbringing. It's one of the things that really stands out in my memories from being a little kid. And music from old school, I'd say a lot of West Coast hip hop that focuses a lot on telling stories and representing the environment in which the different artists grew up, to other genres. I listened to a lot of oldies growing up, a lot of old soul, plenty of reggae music. So sort of had a very diverse set of genres that kind of shaped my musical taste. So for me, that was always something that I was drawn towards as far as understanding other artists and people's modes of expression. And that's something that I chose to take up early on in my life and just kind of continued taking up as far as the way I choose to express myself and my identity.
Awesome. One thing I missed, there will be a time for a Q&A after. So if you have any questions, you can put them down in the chat and we'll get to them at the end of the interview. So Noah, how did you form your connection to Israel? In a lot of your songs, you're very strongly connected to Israel. There's an Israeli flag behind you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that for me growing up, something that my parents really instilled in me was the duty and responsibility I have to my ancestors and to the legacy of those who came before me to do what I can to educate myself and educate my community and the world about my homeland and rights for me to be connected to my homeland. And you know, a little bit more diving into my family background, I think that's relevant to this conversation, would be that, you know, my mom is a Black American. Her family is from Mississippi, actually, and fled due to Jim Crow and due to racism. And before that, were slaves in the South in the United States of America. And this is stuff that we can actually directly trace. But once you get far enough back, there's no tracing, there are no records of anything connected to the actual continent, the mother continent of Africa. And exactly where on the continent, you know, our homeland is. So for me, with the resources that I have now and recognizing their struggle and in order for justice, it's sort of my responsibility to try and reconnect to that homeland, to the culture and the way that we're influenced and shaped by the past, and bringing that into the future. And I feel like that also translates to my Jewish identity, where, you know, my dad actually came to the US as a refugee from the Soviet Union in 1981, actually. So for him, he grew up in the United States, where he had the ability to sort of explore his identity, but that's not where he was born. He was born in a place where a large aspect of Jewish identity was completely wiped off and banned. You weren't allowed to kind of practice. There was a huge effort to disconnect Jewish people from our homeland, and the sorts of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism that we see a lot today are actually, you know, results of Soviet era practices of delegitimizing Jewish peoplehood.
Thank you. So, you know, being a Jew of color, there's a lot going on in our country right now and in the world with the protests regarding Black Lives Matter and a lot of things happening like that. Can you give us a quick insight, your thoughts on what's going on in the world right now?
Yeah, I think that what we're seeing right now is sort of a culmination of a struggle that's gone on forever that I've been aware of, and a lot of members of different communities throughout the US and throughout history have been aware of. And I think that this sort of struggle to highlight the institutional and systematic elements of racism and oppression is extremely important to recognize and to keep up with, and for different groups to figure out their place in supporting Black rights and the struggle for justice for Black Americans.
Thank you. We're now going to jump into your first song that we have up. We're going to listen to Diaspora, written by Westside Gravy, Noah. And then we're going to discuss it after.
Proud part of the diaspora. We ain't gon' play the victim. They get mad every time we're standing up. I'm proud of my people, what we accomplished. You're crazy if you think some rocket barrages will stop us. Look through our history and we've been through it all. Made it through slavery and a Holocaust and still standing tall. At the Kotel Western Wall, saying the Shema, meditating on all the populations to whom this song is dedicated. 6 Jewish families that resided in Khartoum. My Iraqi brothers and sisters survived the Farhud. The ones who came in 56 from Israel, now we're thriving. Garim Berushalayim. וגם בחיפה, הגולן בתל אביב, באר שבע, בנגב ואלה by the sea. אתה יודע שלא שכחתי האתיופים שעשו את הכל, מה אתם אומרים שהם לא יכולים? I'm a proud part of the diaspora. In my heart I hold Jerusalem and Africa. Kicked aside of our land and started gassing us till we put our foot down cause we had enough. Check out the flag that I'm waving. 2 blue stripes and a huge star of David. Check out the flag that I'm waving. Keep shooting rockets, but you never gon' take it. Here I'm talking about the Jews will not replace us on college campuses that been trying to erase us. And all that BDS campaigning, we've dealt with worse problems and racist associations of students all acting stupid and thinking they're making differences, picking and choosing truths and not knowing what real resistance is. Say you value social justice, are you kidding us? What the hell gives you the right to tell me who's indigenous? You don't have it, you just assume the privilege of looking at other people and telling them what their image is. You want the image to fit your twisted narrative, but your divide and conquer tactics ain't scaring this diaspora, of which I'm a proud part. I got blue and white in my veins running through my heart. And they get mad when we're surviving. The truth is, only way they like a Jew is if they're dying. So I'ma say this by the candlelight. Take a moment and remember the fallen for their sacrifice. Never again, never forget. They wanted us dead, we rose from the ashes instead. מלמדים ההיסטוריה מדור לדור. לא יהיה לנו עתיד אם לא נזכור. We wouldn't have a future if we didn't have a past. So every day we gotta take a minute and honor those who passed. Then wake up determined, cause we're returning to the ways that they tried to erase, that we're preserving. Scattered in the wind, in diaspora condition. Still maintain connection to our tradition. From Morocco to Havana to Yemen, living in Aden, Ciudad de Mexico, Buenos Aires, we're all one nation. Through all of the oppression that they threaten, trying to shatter us, I'm still a proud part of the diaspora. I'm a proud part of the diaspora. In my heart I hold Jerusalem in Africa. Kicked aside of our land and started gassing us till we put our foot down cause we had enough. Check out the flag that I'm waving. 2 blue stripes and a huge star of David. Check out the flag that I'm waving. Keep shooting rockets but you never gon' take it.
Well, thank you, Noah. Awesome song.
Thank you.
I really enjoy it, and it a lot of deep things in it. So there's a quote in your chorus. You say, "In my heart, I hold Jerusalem and Africa." So what is it like having those two places, those two separate cultures in your heart? Are there differences between how you hold them in your heart?
Yeah, so I think that that's a really good question. For me, that's actually, I mean, that little said, I'm a proud part of the diaspora. In my heart, I hold Jerusalem and Africa, were the first 2 lyrics that hit me when I decided to sort of go that route with this song. And for me, I think what it represents is being, you know, a product of a diaspora, of a forced diaspora, of being forced out of a homeland. And sort of what I mentioned too earlier about having that responsibility to reconnect with the experiences of our ancestors and those who came before us. So as far as similarities and differences, I think that, you know, the Black diaspora, specifically the Black American experience is quite different from, you know, the Jewish American experience or from my own personal understanding and history, the experience of the Jewish diaspora in the Soviet Union and in Russia. So I think that for me, there are those differences in experience, but the way that they are similar is valuing the uniqueness of each aspect. So valuing the uniqueness and the independent value of Black lives and the Black diaspora within the United States, as well as valuing, you know, recognizing the independent value of the Jewish experience throughout the diaspora and how, you know, they've sort of shaped different communities that have dealt with oppression and discrimination and been able to achieve what, you know, is remarkable in many different ways.
So another quote that you have in your song is, "Keep shooting rockets, but you're never going to take it." You're referring to the Israeli flag. So can you, it's a very large topic with a lot of issues, but can you elaborate just very shortly on your thoughts about the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine?
Yeah, so I think that that is definitely a broad topic, as you mentioned, and there's lots of nuance and a lot of complex discussions to be had, you know, that I've engaged in on campus, that I've engaged in before, and that, you know, I continue to do so to this day. And I think that that's a very important aspect, and that's what gives me hope about seeing so many students who are involved in this sort of student-to-student interaction and recognizing the responsibility of representing our narrative and our story. So for me, what Israel represents is a homeland that was open to so many different Jewish communities from the diaspora who had nowhere else to go, who faced oppression and discrimination, whether it was in Yemen, Iraq, Russia, Germany, you know, all over North Africa, East Africa, and parts of West Africa even. I think that recognizing what that represents and the importance of having a connection to Israel and also our rights to autonomy in our indigenous homeland is key to my beliefs on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And, you know, I'm not going to speak for Palestinians because I think it's also important to recognize the autonomy people have of their own voice and their own narrative. So I think it's my responsibility to speak about my experiences as a Jewish person who, you know, values my connection to my indigenous homeland. And when it comes to politics, you know, I'm a student of Judaic studies. I'm a musician. I'm not necessarily a politician. So, I mean, I have opinions on things that are going on with regards to the conflict, but it's also important to recognize that there's always more to learn and to remember that your narrative and your voice is important. So you shouldn't be afraid to sort of represent who you are and explain the history and why Israel is such an important aspect of your identity, and the Jewish identity as a whole.
Thank you. So you spoke a little bit about how your involvement on your college campus, GW, you've been involved in Israeli discussion. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement and if you faced any backlash or anti-Semitism on your school campus?
Yeah, definitely. So there's been quite a bit of anti-Semitism. I think that it's not unique to GW. Sadly, it's something that goes on all over the United States and also in colleges across the world. That being said, I got involved in Jewish and pro-Israel activism early on in my college career in my freshman year. And for me, what that was really about was sort of, finding a way to connect to my identity and represent and bring a piece of Israel to campus. So there are many ways to do that. Obviously, engaging in political discussion is one of them. But a large focus of my time as part of GW for Israel, from the time when I was freshman representative to director of culture to eventually president of the organization, was focusing on ways we can sort of have this multifaceted approach to Israel, whether it's hosting speakers who we agree with, who we disagree with regards to one-state solution, two-state solution, what does the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict look like, to representing our culture and food and music at events such as, we have an International Students Association who invited us to join into their sort of world tour where we bring a piece of Israel to campus and students can go around Kogan Plaza, which is a main meeting place in the middle of campus, and kind of get a taste of each different country. And, we're sitting there in between, the Pakistani Student Association on one end and the Saudi Arabian Student Association on the other end, and really able to go there and just represent who we are. Or, co-hosting events with the Ethiopian Eritrean Student Association to celebrate Sig, which is the Ethiopian Jewish holiday and a national holiday in Israel, and sort of recognizing the way that, Jewish identity and Israeli identity has so much more to it than strictly politics and political discussions, and sort of reclaiming that narrative and reclaiming our right to represent all these different aspects of our connection to Israel on campus, when so often people try to restrict us to only certain talking points and try to push us off of campus. So definitely there is pushback, and I think it's important to make sure that you don't let anyone else prevent you from expressing your pride, and recognizing that, we're humans and we have human experiences as a whole. We shouldn't be restricted to only speaking about elements of our narrative that other people who want to shut us down try to place on us.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really amazing. And I heard, you just said a little bit of advice for us to when we're going into college, that we can not be afraid to speak our minds, and really thank you so much. So now we want to move on to a second song, Legacy. Can you tell us a little bit about Legacy before we play it? Just a short opening quote.
Yeah, definitely. So Legacy is a song that I actually wrote and dedicated to my papa, my great-grandfather, who actually fled Mississippi in the 1950s due to racism and made a life in Southern California. And due to his hard work and struggle that I think is reflected in my grand and papa both, who put in so much work, blood, sweat, and tears into creating opportunities for future generations, including me, to be able to get educated and to rise past the limits that the Jim Crow system and systemic racism has put on the Black community, and specifically my family. So that's what this song is dedicated to, and respecting that legacy that my grand and papa leave for me.
Thank you. All right, let's hear it, Legacy.
I'm a Cali boy, but I got some southern tendencies. Collard greens in the kitchen on Thanksgiving, I make mac and cheese. Traditions brought from the dirty South, dirtiest pocket by my grand and papa. Gotta make sure this story's not forgotten. Made it out the Mississippi mud. Only thing on a white man's mind, spilling blood of the black man living next to him. That's why if you ask, now his house dead to him. Left for a reason, 85 years after freedom. They weren't slaves dealing with some other demons. The past doesn't just get erased, slaves take Confederate flags still raised. Sharecroppers, racism, plantations, never made it past 6th grade education. Chasing safety in a great migration, cause they got displaced by Caucasians. In my family, hustle is all that we know. Dirt floors in Mississippi to owning acres in the Dino. That's what that dirt floor work ethic is. Hardships giving birth to this black excellence. That's what that dirt floor work ethic is. Hardships giving birth to this black excellence. Never wasting time on complaints, I can't afford those. They sacrificed back then, so I've never lived in a dirt floored home. Making opportunities every single time another door closed. But a little California house surrounded by orange groves. From the Mississippi mud, leaving behind them trees where them nooses hung. Nowadays might not have nooses up, it doesn't stop one time from shooting us. If they made it, I can just believe it. They willed it, more than just dreamed it. Insane, it's got me thinking how crazy it is to have great-grandkids on the dean's list of a college, top 100 in the ranking, and in their lifetime it was segregated. That's my explanation why I was raised feeling obligations. I don't do it for myself, I do it for the past, generations ahead. Can imagine setbacks I'd face if they just given up instead. Giving up was never an option. Perseverance in my veins. Race to know this grind ain't stopping. Cause in my family, hustle is all that we know. Dirt floors in Mississippi to owning acres in the Dino. That's what that dirt floor work ethic is. Hardships giving birth to this black excellence. That's what that dirt floor work ethic is. Hardships giving birth to this black excellence.
Wow, a very, very powerful song. Thank you. So in this song, you talk about the blacks that were enslaved in America. And, you know, in Judaism, we had the Jews that were enslaved in Egypt. They're obviously very different, but do you ever make connections between them? Are there any similarities, differences, things like that?
Yeah, so I think that, again, that's a really good question and really important point to bring up. So one thing I always like to highlight and think about when I think about connections between the stories of enslavement of Jewish people and, you know, the enslavement that, you know, Black people have faced in the United States, I like to think about the sort of inspiration that many Black leaders have found in the story of the Exodus, from old songs and Negro spirituals and slave songs that, you know, take religion that was sort of forced on Black people as far as Christianity and those sorts of interpretations, and actually find meaning in the Hebrew Bible stories of Jewish people overcoming the oppression. I think that that's extremely interesting to examine and powerful. And actually have a new song that I've been working on coming up that sort of draws on that. But so I think that when, you know, I talked a little bit earlier about the uniqueness of the Jewish experience and the uniqueness of the Black experience. I think that both situations are extremely unique and operated sort of in their own independent contexts in terms of the story of Exodus and the story of Jewish enslavement in Egypt versus the history of Black enslavement in the US. I think what's important to recognize is, you know, in Judaism on Pesach, you're supposed to celebrate as if you're the one who came out of Egypt. And I think that, you know, in the context of Black culture in the United States, one aspect that's been the most important to my upbringing is respecting elders. So, for example, the people who I'm talking about in Legacy, my gran and papa, listening to their stories, these are people who, you know, my family members who knew, you know, their parents or grandparents who were slaves, who lived in Jim Crow South, who were sharecroppers. And, you know, respecting that story, you know, as, you know, this is my family, people who I know who literally rose up from that sort of oppression, I think is a common theme that you could sort of examine in the way that, you know, we as Jews are supposed to remember the Exodus and remember the story of Pesach and where we've come from, and the way that Black Americans are, you know, raised to kind of respect our elders and respect our history.
Oh, thank you. So we talked a little bit about it at the beginning of the interview, but this line is so perfect to what's happening now. You said that nowadays might not have nooses up. It doesn't stop one time from shooting us. So that has to do with, I'm assuming, police brutality and everything that we're talking about now. So we already heard your thoughts on the situation, what's going on now, but can you give us a little insight on something that, what's our role as Jews, as white people, and what we can do to help the conversation?
Yeah, so I think that one thing that's sad to say is that in this line I said nowadays might not have nooses up. It doesn't stop one time. One time is reference. It's a slang term for police from shooting us. And I think that's something that's extremely sad is in the past several weeks there have actually been multiple black men found hanging in Southern California, not far from where my grandpapa moved from Mississippi to California. So that's not necessarily the most accurate line at the moment, but it's sort of an examination of the way that institutional racism has played out against the black community. And I think that as in terms of what Jewish people can do and what the role of I would say in general, non-black people as a whole, obviously doesn't include all Jews, many of whom are black, is to recognize the space that we occupy, all of us, like collectively, on sort of this spectrum of privilege. Now, that doesn't mean that Jews necessarily, who historically have not been considered white, have not necessarily benefited from white privilege in the same way people of European origins without sort of the Levantine and Middle Eastern origins of Jewish people, whether Ashkenazi or Sephardic. The way that we can examine the ways that we've been able to overcome and ally in different situations throughout the diaspora, whether it was, in the Soviet Union or in different Middle Eastern, North African countries, recognizing how we were able to get organized and who we were able to achieve like assistance from is an important first step. And recognizing that just because we, may occupy a certain place of privilege, or the way many Jews and non-black Jews see themselves, sort of this, I feel like what I've seen a lot is sort of this dualistic view of either you're privileged or you're not privileged. And if you're privileged, that means you're white. If you're not privileged, that means you're not white. And Jewish people historically in the United States have not occupied that sort of clear, definitive white, non-white space. So I think that it's important to recognize that while Jewish people may not have had that experience of being white, we still are in a unique experience of being able to recognize that we're, have a different history. So let's say my dad, for example, who's non-black, had to deal with plenty of anti-Semitism, fleeing institutional racism in the Soviet Union, coming to the US where there is a history of anti-Semitism, but he was still able to recognize that his experience is not the same as, my mom and my mom's side of the family who are black and who faced a different level and different context behind that institutional racism that actually affected their experience and what different ways that they're able to circumvent that system. So recognizing that while, yes, we may, as Jewish people, face anti-Semitism, non-black Jews don't necessarily have that same context of, history of slavery and Jim Crow that black people have in the US. So recognizing that there is that ability to sort of circumvent a system that doesn't necessarily apply to you in order to assist black people is a great first step, and I think where this conversation really needs to start.
So thank you so much. That was a really beautiful answer. We're almost running out of time, and so we're going to open the floor up to questions in a minute. Just a final, you've already said a little bit about it, but it's really important, considering how many seniors are in JCRC and will be moving on to either a gap year or college or wherever they may end up. But do you have any advice for the conversation, for supporting Israel, for all that stuff going on?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to find your space, find your community who will support you and who will support your conversation surrounding Israel. And being able to have nuanced and complex conversations about Israel, about your identity, about your connection to the state of Israel, the land of Israel, and the people of Israel, without necessarily feeling like you have to sacrifice your identity. And what I've experienced in college and also in the post-high school world in general is sort of this expectation that to navigate and be in certain spaces you have to sacrifice an aspect of your identity. And I think that capitulating to that sort of pressure is one of the worst things that we can do as a community. And for me, it's inspiring to see all the great work that you all have done as students, interacting with different members of different communities and really explaining what it means to be a part of the nation and the people of Israel. And I think that, my advice is to continue to do that, whether it's, getting involved in Israeli cultural groups on campus, whether it's engaging in political conversations, or whether it's being present in non-Israel related groups and spaces where you're clear about representing who you are and how that's part of your identity, and how that doesn't stop you from being involved in other aspects of campus life or wherever life takes you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So that's all the questions that I have. I'm going to read some questions that we have in the chat box from people in the chat have asked, and this is basically the Q&A. So if anybody else has any more questions, they can put it in the chat box and hopefully we can get to it. So the first question is, Jews and Blacks have suffered from persecution, oppression, slavery, and intolerance. What are your thoughts about the differences in how Jews as a people in America have overcome the intense hatred or intolerance and have been successful versus the Black experience in America?
Yeah, so I think that it's important to recognize the context in which people experience this sort of oppression, persecution, and discrimination. So I've had this conversation a lot with regards to Israel and Israeli politics, so I can get into that a little bit because I see a connection. So a lot of the discourse right now tries to compare the Palestinian Arab experience to that of the Black American experience. And while I think that, people can speak about discrimination, oppression, and their experiences of persecution, it's important to recognize the contextual differences. So Black Americans were brought to the United States as slaves, primarily. Many other people have immigrated since, but when we're speaking about the Black American experience, my own Black American experience, it has its origins in slavery and being kidnapped, and triumphs over that specific system and the ways it adapted, such as Jim Crow, such as over-policing, and educational inequalities. Now, that's not something that's necessarily true, at all true for Palestinian Arab communities. They were not brought to Israel as slaves. And I think that trying to make both experiences the same is a disservice to the memory that we have as Black Americans and our own uniqueness in our experience. So I think that the same sort of applies to the Jewish experience within the United States, in terms of Jewish people have experienced, persecution, oppression, and intolerance in the US, and violence, and I've been a victim of it. And we've been able to triumph, but haven't necessarily been faced with the same sort of obstacles as Black people have. So for me, as a Black man, knowing that I have a different set of obstacles, it's important to recognize why that would make an outcome potentially different versus, when you look at a different country. For example, if you look at different countries in Europe, where Jews faced a different sort of institutional level of anti-Semitism and racism that was more similar to what Black people have faced, from the US government attacking us. I think that it's important to recognize that many Jewish people fled those situations and had to find different solutions in other countries where, they fled to the United States maybe, or a lot of times to Israel, and so in order to exercise their autonomy. So recognizing the importance of reclaiming autonomy over our communities and the way that we connect to our heritage is extremely important, because it allows us to get rid of a system that's built to oppress us as Black people, that's different than the system that was put in place in the United States that disregarded Jews and was intolerant.
Thank you. Another question from our chat is a little bit more about your music and what you do. So how is your work and your message being promoted and heard? Do you perform, tour, etc.?
Yeah, so my work, I try to make it as available as possible online. So when I release songs, I put them on all platforms, free, paid, doesn't matter to me. I want them to get out there. So a lot of different people will reach out and listen to a song and find it an interesting perspective, and they'll reach out, and I've had different articles written. So that's one way that my art itself has been promoted. But I also definitely perform. So I've gone around to a lot of different Jewish youth group conventions and also different events on college campus to really try to promote who I am and my identity through my music and explain my story. So I think that that's like the most important thing to me, is just taking grasp of every opportunity afforded to me to really get out there and share my music.
Also, I heard that you performed with Ma Tisiahu. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was really cool. That was something that came together. I'd like to shout out the Israel Fellow at George Washington University, Mai, for connecting me with the Jewish agency who was putting together this sort of a live video in celebration of Israel on Yom HaAtzmaut to really, celebrate Israel, and Matisiyahu was part of that. So she put me in contact with the right people, and I was able to be part of that live online performance, singing One Day with Matisiyahu.
Awesome. Our next question is, have you ever been in a situation where you try and hide your origins, maybe because it was too complicated to explain? And is it ever hard to balance your Black culture and your Jewish culture or not?
So I think that there are many situations where, I've talked to people and they've felt uncomfortable. Maybe they've tucked in their Star of David in order to hide, their Judaism and that aspect of their identity because they don't feel safe or in a threatening environment. And then also with regards to like the difficulty or too complicated to explain, I think that's definitely something that influences many different Jews and Black Jews to sort of feel uncomfortable because we get hounded with a lot of questions. It gets kind of exhausting. That being said, personally, I think that obviously if someone's like safety is at risk, I'm going to advise you to, that's the most important thing is to preserve your safety in an environment. I'm not going to, say go to an environment where they're actively talking about harming Jews and proclaim that you're a Jew and, put yourself at risk. I'm not going to necessarily advocate for that. That being said, for me, it's important really to be out here and represent who I am. And if it comes to anti-Semitism and having to answer these complicated questions, it's an opportunity for me to represent my culture and my background. And it's a learning experience for everyone involved. That doesn't necessarily mean it's always appropriate to ask, a bunch of questions. But if I have a chance to speak up for who I am and speak about why that may put many Black Jews in an uncomfortable situation, then that's an opportunity that I take.
Thank you. So I think we're a little bit over, but I'm just gonna do this one last question. It's a long one. So there are many social justice and political activism groups that will associate themselves with anti-Israel movements like the BDS movement. As someone who believes in both the social justice movements as well as being strongly pro-Israel, do you reconcile these two things, as well as any more tips for people going to these college campuses, spaces, and dealing with groups like this?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to recognize the difference and sort of the difference in context of different experiences. So being Jewish and being supportive of Jewish autonomy is not at odds at all with being, supportive of social justice and other liberation movements throughout the world. So I think that when someone else tries to frame it as that, it definitely can get complicated on a campus. But for me, what I try to do most is sort of put the ball in the other person's court, per se. So I'm going to be there regardless with my voice, with my Star of David on, and represent me being Black, me being Jewish, and being a Zionist, being a strong believer in Jewish liberation, and being there and being present for other people who are facing oppression and discrimination. And if someone else wants to exclude me from that, I'm not going to allow them and sort of give them the power to own the narrative of what it means for me to be a Zionist and be a Jew. I'm not going to play into the idea that, me being a Zionist and believing in Jewish liberation, Jewish autonomy means that I should step out of other spaces, because that's not what Zionism is. And I think it's important for us to define ourselves and to sort of own our own narrative.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Noah. That's we've gone over time because it was a really awesome questions from the crowd. Thank you so much. I don't know what's happening next in this Zoom, but
don't worry, I'm next.
Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you, Noah. Thank you, Aiden. I wasn't going to ask one more question as you just turned your mute on. But I'm going to throw out one more question that came up in the chat, because I think it's something that a lot of us think about, is how can we in the Jewish community be more welcoming to Jews of color so that they feel that they're part of our community? We see it as it, but clearly I'm not sure that's coming across and everyone doesn't feel welcome.
Yeah, so I've had a lot of different experiences in different types of communities where I felt ostracized, marginalized, or places like GW Hillel where I feel completely welcome and I don't really get that many questions. So I think the key is not, being necessarily so doubtful if you see someone enter your community. And I'd for me, my experience in Israel has been completely different from that sort of experience I've gotten in the US. I don't really get questions about how am I Jewish. I don't really get any doubts about my Jewish identity. When I'm in Israel, people are sort of more welcoming and glad to see someone from the diaspora and from, different cultural backgrounds being part of their Jewish community. And I think in America, we can kind of take some of that acceptance and welcoming attitude and be happy that we have people, because you know, there are plenty of questions that I get about how am I Jewish, in what ways. I don't think that's necessarily always an appropriate question to ask if it's filled with sort of that level of doubt and disbelief.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. There were so many words of wisdom that you shared with all of us, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk. Aiden, thank you for facilitating the conversation. I think that, you know, really many of the things you talked about are things we've talked about in Student to Student and really tried to work on in terms of how we can have our conversations about who we are. So thank you for helping us bring it to the next level and give us some food for thought as we go on to college, or those of us going to their senior year. You still have one more year of Student to Student, so don't forget. So thank you so much. Thank you everybody for joining us. Again, Mazel Tov to the seniors, to the juniors. We're looking forward to having you again next year. And thank you all for sharing your amazing teens with us. It's been a great experience. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you in the fall.
We didn't get to ask our Reed's question about how, you know, how your Hebrew is so good and how come you don't have an accent.
Yeah, I learned it mostly growing up in different Jewish day schools, but also I have a lot of Israeli friends on campus. So I try to practice my Hebrew as much as possible. And now my brother actually lives there. He's in the IDF, so I try to practice with him. And
wow.
Oh, good. Well, my daughter's on the call and actually wanted to ask you what school you went to in San Diego, but I told her she couldn't ask that question. But, you know, now that it's over.
Academy. Shout out, I love to represent.
Okay. Okay, well, feel free if you want to unmute yourself and say hello. You're welcome to, or you're welcome to go. Thank you for.
Thank you, Noah. It was a real pleasure meeting you, and you're amazing. You're such an inspiration, really. Best of luck to you with the rest of your studies and in the IDF.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Take care.